In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate the techniques used to create closed ring cables. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. The cables that you see right here are stockinette cables. That is, all of the cables in this column of stitches are knit stitches, and they're flanked on the sides by purl stitches, but everything that's actually involved in the cable and the crossings is made up of knit stitches. This type of cable here is called a traveling cable. We still have the columns of purl stitches flanking the cable, but within the cable itself you can see purl stitches. So the number of purl stitches that are within this whole span remains consistent. We've got 4 ropes here that are each made up of 2 knit stitches, and those ropes are crossing the background of purl stitches until they encounter another rope of knit stitches, and then those cross each other, and then they continue on crossing the background of purl stitches. What you see here is another type of traveling cable, and in this case the traveling cable is really quite different. There are ropes are really moving across the background of purl stitches in a variety of ways and intersecting with each other in different ways. But what you'll notice is that what you have up here are a lot more ropes that are crossing each other than what you start out with down here. And that's because additional ropes are introduced into the fabric. This swatch shows a traveling cable. This is actually some stockinette cable right here that then splits off into 2 ropes that travel. We have 2 ropes that start here that begin to travel. And again, we have a situation where 2 new ropes appear out of nowhere and begin interacting with the existing ropes. But once they get up to here and they meet each other, then the loop is closed and we're back down to 4 ropes, the 4 ropes that we started with. This type of situation in a traveling cable, where you have ropes appearing out of the background of purls and then ropes disappearing back into the background of purls, are called closed ring cables. And as I mentioned, in the first traveling cable that I showed you, the background of purl stitches remains consistent. So when these new ropes appear, they are created by doing increases. And when they disappear by using a special type of decrease. So this is the simplest type of closed ring cable, which is an actual ring. In this case, we've got a background of 13 purl stitches. I've got some garter stitch edges here to keep the fabric from rolling. Here's a chart that I created for this particular ring. And what you can see is these shaded areas, these 4 boxes that are shaded gray, indicate that there's no stitch there. So I said I had 13 purl stitches going back and forth. So you'll see the dots are 13 stitches all the way across. And now I'm ready to create the ropes that are going to form the base of this ring. So I've got my garter border, and now I'm going to work 6 purl stitches. I'm going to work the 6 purl stitches that you see right here at the beginning of the row. Now I'm going to work a make 1 increase. To do a make 1 increase, you lift the running thread between stitches onto the needle, and then you work that lifted loop through the back. So then you just knit it. So if you hold the yarn in your right hand, you wrap it around. If you hold it in your left hand, you pick the stitch. Now in this purl stitch, this center purl stitch, we're going to work an increase called a central double increase. We're turning 1 stitch into 3 stitches. And you do it by knitting through the back of the stitch and then the front. So you enter the back, you knit the stitch, you leave it on the needle, and you swing the working needle around the front so that you can enter through the front, and then you knit it again. And now you let the old stitch off the needle. So you've got 2 new stitches that you've created out of that single one. You've got your make 1, but then you've got these 2 new stitches. And now if you look closely between these two stitches, you'll see there's a vertical strand right there. You're going to take your left needle from behind and lift it onto the needle. And now you're going to work this stitch through the back, not the front, but through the back. And now you have 3 stitches that were created out of that single purl stitch. So far we've got 4 stitches, and now we do another make 1 increase where we lift that running thread onto the needle and then we work it through the back. Now you may wonder, why aren't we mirroring these make 1 increases? You could if you wanted, but there's not really any reason to. And now we're just going to purl the rest of the stitches until we get to the garter border. That middle stitch is going to remain a purl stitch when viewed from the front. So what we've created is 2 new knit stitches. We still have the original purl stitch, and then we've created 2 new knit stitches over on the left. We're going to work on the wrong side of the fabric. So of course, when you're working on the back side of purl fabric, you see knit stitches. So we're going to knit those 6 stitches right here, just as they present. And then we work these 5 stitches as they need to be worked on the wrong side of the work, which is that the first 2 are going to be purled because they're going to look like knits on the front of the work. And then we knit the center stitch, which appears as a purl on the front of the fabric. And then we purl these 2 stitches. And then we knit the rest. So we have these 5 stitches established as they are meant to be established right here. And then we can work this cable pretty much like we'd work any cable. If you're not familiar with cable charts, there's a link to how to read cable charts at the top of the screen. So I'm going to meet you back when I have worked this cable all the way to the point where I do the last cable crossing. Now I'm back at the point where the ropes have come back to the center. So if you look right here, you can see I've got 2 knit stitches, a purl, and 2 knit stitches. And so I have just finished doing this crossing row. So I'm about to do a wrong side row, and there I have this little symbol that shows there's a 5 in the middle, and it's an upside down V. And what this is indicating is that 5 stitches are going to become 1 stitch. I'll do my garter stitch border, then I'll work on the wrong side. This will be 6 knit stitches, and then I'm going to decrease the stitches that were involved in the cable back down to 1. You're going to slip the first 3 stitches. So you're going to slip all the way up to that center stitch. And you slip as if to purl so that you maintain the stitch mount. So you've got those 3 stitches on the needle. Now you're going to pass the second stitch over that center stitch. Now you're going to move the center stitch back to the left needle. And you're going to pass this stitch over. So now we've passed 2 stitches over, so we've eliminated 2 of them. We're going to move this back again. And we're going to pass this one over. So we've passed the 3rd stitch over. We're going to slip it back again to the left hand needle. And now we're going to pass the 4th stitch over. So now we've eliminated those 4 stitches, and we just have that 1 stitch that we started with. And now we actually are going to work it. And we're going to work it as a knit stitch because we're on the wrong side of the work. And then we just knit to the end of the row. So now I have finished the ring. I want to talk a little bit about how this type of cable is charted. Because there's a difference in the way that I charted this particular cable and how designers today might chart this cable versus the way it was originally charted in Barbara Walker's book, Charted Knitting Designs, which was her 3rd Treasury of Knitting Stitch Patterns. So I want to make you aware of that because there are many patterns and many pattern books that incorporate closed cable designs that will have used the method of charting that Barbara Walker used. But today, knitters or designers are tending toward charting things a little bit differently than that, and I want to show you the difference. So in my chart, I had 4 no-stitch boxes. That is, this chart has 17 boxes all the way across, but there were only 13 purl stitches that were being worked. So there were 4 boxes where I had colored them in with no stitch boxes. And then in the row where I increased, I did a make 1, and then I did the central double increase where that purl stitch was turned into 3 stitches. Then I have a box that is 3 stitches wide that represents the number of stitches you'll have after the increase has been worked. And then there's a box with a make 1 increase here. So we increased from 1 stitch to 5 stitches in that row. So all of the no stitch boxes were eliminated. And this is how designers are tending to design today, is that they want the chart row to represent what will be on the needles once your row is completed, so that you can compare what you have on your needles to what was in the chart. Barbara Walker charted increases differently when the increases were created out of nothing. That is, if an increase was created between 2 existing stitches, like a make 1 increase or a yarn over increase, that increase was represented in a box with its own symbol. So it told you, this right here, M stands for make 1, so that took up a box. But when increases were worked within an existing stitch, the symbol represented the action, and it represented what you would end up with, but it still only occupied 1 box. So what you see here is we have 4 no-stitch boxes. She represented them with X's instead of shading them in. And when we get to the row where we worked a make 1, the central double increase, and then the other make 1, you'll see that there are still 2 no-stitch boxes here, because the increase that takes 1 stitch and turns it into 3 is only occupying 1 box. And it isn't until the following row that all of the stitch boxes are occupied by a stitch. So that is something to be aware of. When you are knitting cables from a pattern or a pattern book where they used Barbara Walker's method of charting this type of cable. Alice Starmore has many designs that have closed loop cables, and she does something slightly different in her increases, but she does the same thing with the no stitch boxes. So that's something to look out for. Melissa Leapman uses this exact type of chart, and so you would know from her charts that she's following Barbara Walker's example. Cabled stitch patterns are amongst my favorite things to knit, and I particularly enjoy knitting traveling cable patterns. Add a couple of closed ring cables to the mix and I'm in heaven. The techniques I showed you today were developed by Barbara G. Walker and first published in her book Charted Knitting Designs back in 1972. In the decades since then, many knitting designers have used those concepts that Walker created and tweaked them slightly for their own uses. They may have made a minor change to how the increases are worked, or they may have done as I did today and changed the way the chart is presented. One designer has taken Walker's closed ring cable concept and changed it in ways that are significantly different. Next week, we'll look at the similarities and differences between Elizabeth Lavald's Viking cables and Walker's closed ring cables. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.